Good morning and welcome to First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church, to our weekly online worship. It is July in Texas and it is hot. So take a moment out of your busy day to find a cool and comfortable spot and worship with us. In giving ourselves permission to rest, we strengthen ourselves for the work ahead of us, the work of helping to make the world a better place in which to live. If you haven't done so already, fill out the census report for your entire household, because if you don't count, we can't support you. All of our taxed programs, our schools, our medical facilities, our highways, and our services are predicated on your being part of the tally. And if you haven't done so, register to vote or tell someone you know hasn't registered to do so. And if you think you're going to need a mail-in ballot in November's very important election, ask for it now so that you don't get overlooked in the rush. We talk about the possibility of an election being won by a single vote. Well, let's not forget it can also be lost by a vote that isn't taken. If you haven't done so this morning, this is Mother Annie. We're reminding you to wash your hands or wash them again. Hand washing and masks, along with social distancing, are very important in our making it through this global pandemic. We want to see you on the other side of it. But for now, sit back and relax, hydrate, and lend us your ears. Let us begin our worship with music. Our pianist, as always, is Misha Berestnev. There is enough space between us to hold all that you are carrying, all that you've been waking, wondering, worrying, or wearing out with confusion, or attempts to control, trying to find some sense of normal. All of your irritability, your curiosity, your fragile sobriety, your numb disbelief, your loneliness, your exhaustion, your daily questions, allergies or the virus, and your joy. We can hold that too. We can hold all of it here for this time, and we can bless it. Here we will call each other just as we are, beloved. Here in this far apart space, this is also close in. So much remains uncertain. With each passing breath, the ground is shifting. All we can say for sure is that we are caught in this tangled blessing of life, of grief, of gratitude, but we are caught together, like always except more. With all the forces of nature and the spinning of the earth, we are turning and becoming and beginning again, offering ourselves like the crocus flower breaking through with a wild beauty, ready for whatever comes next. Let us worship together. And let us sing together. Our song leader this morning is Della Purdon, and we are singing number 18 in the hymn book, What Wondrous Love Is This? The words will be on your screen.
What wondrous love is this, O my soul, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, O my soul? What wondrous love is this that brings my heart such bliss and takes away the pain of my soul, and takes away the pain of my soul. When I was sinking down, sinking down, sinking down, when I was sinking down, oh my soul, when I was sinking down beneath my sorrow's ground, friends to me gathered round, oh my soul, friends to me gathered round, oh my soul. To love and to all friends I will sing, I will sing. To love and to all friends I will sing. To love and to all friends who pain and sorrow mends, with thanks unto the end I will sing, I will sing. With thanks unto the end I will sing.
First, let there be darkness. For it is from our dark places that we are brought forward, tried and tested, impelled toward growth. It is in these dark places that we realize compassion and learn to love. And then, let there be light. Let there be light, the light of joy, the light of happiness, and the light of contentment. May it illuminate our paths and fill our lives with peace. Again, welcome to the service this morning. Our second principle of the 7 principles that we support supports justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. I've been thinking about this. We fight for justice. We endorse, we demand equity. But what strong verb defines compassion? It's a more intimate than active concept, isn't it? But my second question this morning is this: how do these concepts differ? Pity and sympathy and empathy and compassion, which is our topic today. And my third question then, as I've considered the first two, is can compassion be taught? Can it be strengthened? And I'll be addressing all 3 questions all at once in no particular order this morning. So while you think of your responses to these questions, and please notice I don't ask for answers because answers are definitive and they put an end to questioning, which is healthy. While you think of your responses, let us speak our covenant together. Love is the doctrine of this church, and the quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. What were you taught as a child about taking care of yourself that might have led you to become compassionate? Yes, I start my response with another question. Or perhaps I should have started with, are you compassionate? As I read about the practice of compassion throughout the world, that it is part of all faith systems, I continue to ask myself these questions. I do consider myself to be a compassionate person, but I know it wasn't always true. How then did I learn to be this person? What was I taught about compassion? And was I taught to be compassionate with myself? This is a very important question that I will refer to again later on. Actually, as the oldest sibling in my family, and like many oldest siblings, I was taught that I was in charge of taking care of others, making sure that they were happy. I was to settle the arguments between my younger brother and sister, or at best divert them. I was to make my father happy by getting good grades in school. I was to make my mother happy by learning to do the things she did so that I could relieve her of her burdens from time to time. I was not to bring shame on the family, and I was to excel in all things. I don't remember anything being said about compassion. I carried these teachings into my adult life. Did they make me compassionate? No. They made me overworked and underappreciated and always offering more, trying to make people happy. It was as if I wore a sign that said, "Born to serve, I grant wishes." It wasn't until I was well into my 30s that I thought to ask, but what about me? When do I get my wishes? When do I get my happiness? And when I received no answer, I decided it was time to put myself literally in charge of my own happiness. For a while, I was the center of my own world until little by little I felt nourished and whole. And then, that's when I began to learn about compassion. All religions teach compassion or demand it in some form or another, some more forcefully than others. Some demand putting other people before yourself. Buddhism, however, always insists on starting with yourself, with being compassionate to yourself before you try to reach out to others. There are no martyrs in Buddhism. There are only bodhisattvas, whole and holy volunteers on the wheel of life. Some people take longer to learn compassion than others. It might be because they haven't yet learned to be compassionate with themselves. If you never thought about how you treat yourself, how compassionate you are with yourself, or if you have a hard time understanding how you feel, you won't be able to really understand compassion. Even if you think you might be a compassionate person, I suggest you take this simple test. Set a time when you can be by yourself. Make sure to wall off a good hour where you know you won't be interrupted by anybody. Take the mood seriously. Turn on a favorite piece of music and pour a cup or glass of your favorite drink. Then pull out a pen and a sheet of paper and spend the next 30 minutes writing down everything that is on your plate. Every responsibility you shoulder, every worry you carry, every source of stress you own, every challenge that comes your way and you accept, every person who depends on you right now. Trust me, it will take at least 30 minutes. There is hardly anyone whose load is light. Even if you think yours is, you'll quickly realize it's not. And that's exactly the point. Somewhere between number 9 and number 14 on your list, you will say to yourself, "Whew, I'm carrying a lot." And it will be right then that the need for compassion for yourself will start to become evident. Keep going. Keep adding to the list. As you do, it will become more than apparent to your heart and not just your head that you are not just deserving of compassion, but also admiration. That's right. There will be this moment when you finally allow yourself to be surprised at how well you are handling things. It will make all those perfectionist, self-punishing voices in your head seem just plain silly. Let yourself feel that. And in that moment, make yourself say something out loud to yourself. Tell yourself exactly the compassionate thing you would say to a friend whose list is as long as yours. Will you do this for yourself? Now think again about the covenant we spoke just a few moments ago. Think of the promises in it that might snag your selflessness, that lead into your helping others first and ignoring your self-addiction. Love is the doctrine. Now when you hear the word love, do you hear that silent adjective, unconditional love? It's like thorns on a rose, isn't it? Then we say service is our prayer. To serve others, we say. And those too will snag you if you don't first have compassion for yourself. We tell one another to seek knowledge, learn more, read more, do more. Is that what you hear? Or do you hear the compassion words in that covenant? We dwell together in freedom, in community, all souls in harmony. There is a compassion scale, you know. You need to find your place on it because it starts with you. But for now, let this quote from Buddhist nun Pema Chodron be a hint. She wrote, "Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It is a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity." Okay, I've given you something to think about for a minute, and let's just leave it there for now. But put a bookmarker in it so you can come back to these ideas. In the meantime, I invite you to enjoy a story for all ages. This one is called Tiny the God by Becky Brooks. Once upon a time, there was a tiny little itty-bitty, very small, teeny little god named Tiny. She lived her life hearing stories of all the big gods, and, well, let's face it, she was jealous. She knew she needed to think of some kind of special spark, an idea that would make her existence as a god more meaningful to humankind. Then she might become bigger. Well, after watching humans for a long time and realizing that many of them stumbled about in their lives as if they didn't know what it was all about, sad and lonely and feeling lost, she hit upon something that she thought just might work, something to make people think that Tiny had got a really big idea. And this was it. This was going to make her famous. Are you ready for it? Here it is. She would tell them, "You are not alone." Now, wouldn't that be nice to hear, she thought. She took the form of a very light breeze, and in a voice so quiet, people heard it only in their minds, she whispered, "You are not alone. You are not alone." And people loved it. It was perfect because who doesn't want to hear that? And pretty soon Tiny was comforting people all over the world with, "You are not alone." And every day she took the form of the breeze or a cloud formation, and she whispered it to people's minds. Until one day, she encountered someone who wasn't comforted at all. Now, Miriam was a woman who lived alone. She lived in a tiny house without even a cat or a dog for company. Tiny thought she would be thrilled, but when Miriam heard Tiny's words in her mind, instead of feeling comforted, she felt, well, agitated. Something was just kind of off about it. She kept saying it to herself over and over again, "You are not alone. You are not alone." She tossed and she turned at night. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't figure out what bothered her about it. And then in the morning, she went to read the newspaper. Instead of skimming everything, she found herself drinking in every single story. She was only halfway through when she found herself weeping. "I am not alone," she said, as if she had finally heard it. "I am connected to every one of these people. They live in my town. They live in my country. They live in my world. They love their children like I loved mine before they left home. They were scared sometimes, and so am I. They hurt like I hurt. I am not alone, and I can help them. Well, Tiny was very surprised. It hadn't occurred to her that someone might think of it that way. Wasn't not being alone enough? So Tiny kept watch over Miriam to monitor this interesting person, this development in her scheme. Miriam and a co-worker met online in a meeting and talked about a law they hoped that the Senate would pass. And then Tiny noticed that as soon as the meeting was done, Miriam wrote a letter to her senator about it right away. She noticed that when Miriam turned in her grocery order, she bought a few extra things for her neighbors who weren't doing as well as she, and she left them with a colorful note on their porches. She saw that Miriam had tears in her eyes when she joined in her congregation's virtual worship on her computer, and she heard her favorite hymn through the small speakers. Miriam got out her phone and made an extra donation to the church. Tiny watched as Miriam wrote postcards to friends and family, near and far, waved to the dog walkers who passed by her house, and strung up cheerful, colorful lights in her living room window. But most importantly for Tiny, she noticed when Miriam received a phone call that evening from a friend she hadn't heard from in a long while. His voice was shaking. He said, "I'm having a hard time." And he began to tell her about his troubles. And then he began to cry. Well, Miriam got herself comfortable in her favorite chair, and she says, "Take your time. I'll stay on the line with you. You are not alone. I am here." Tiny heard those words in her mind. I am here. They were like an echo. You are not alone. I am here. You are not alone. I am here. In that moment, Tiny knew that she was nothing in the God world without Miriam's hands and heart and spirit. And she knew that what she wanted, what the world needed more than anything, was what Miriam had learned to give. So Tiny went to work. Instead of just spending her evenings spreading the word, "You are not alone," she spent her night times doing it too, and her mornings and her afternoons, and she added these words on the breeze: "You are connected. You can help." Pretty soon she was spending so much time sharing this good news that she became the breeze itself. And that is why there are no paintings of Tiny, no statues, no holy books, just a breeze, a low voice, and many, many helping hands and loving hearts and caring spirits. You can hear the echo if you listen closely. You are not alone. I am here. When water bottles are left in the desert for those who risk their lives to cross it, you can hear it. You are not alone. I am here. At the bedside of a dying man, you can hear it. You are not alone. I am here. In the jailhouse and in the sanctuary, you can hear it. You are not alone. I am here. Separate and together. You are not alone. We are here. We can help. May it be so. It's time to give my weekly generosity report. And I wanted to tell you that, first of all, that the Unitarian Universalist Association, which holds the mortgage on our building, has extended us the option of paying interest only on the loan during the next year to help us through these perilous times of the pandemic. And we thank them for their generosity. I wanted to share with you the happy news that our program to help feed pets during this time, people who have trouble feeding their families, has garnered more than 800 pounds of dog and cat food and more than $60 in cash for this program that we work with Eastside Community Services and pass out pet food with the food bank. And I want to remind you that if you need assistance, the generosity of this congregation has donated to me a small sum of money to distribute at my discretion to people in temporary straits. This is a generosity that has always been evident in this congregation, and I thank everyone for the presence of that fund. And thanks to all of you for the generosities that you extend so silently that I'm not even aware of some of them at this moment. Well, I'm ready to give you my second response, and I want to start again with Tiny's words. You are not alone. I am here. That's the beginning of the definition of compassion, you know. And once you have compassion for yourself, it is easier to say. But what about those other words, those concepts that parade as synonyms? There's pity, there's sympathy, there's empathy. Too often, compassion gets translated into one of these, misunderstood as one of these. But they are on a scale, what I referred to earlier as the compassion scale. And you are a part of that scale depending on your definitions. Pity, while evoking as much feeling as compassion, has an understood caveat that says, I'm really sorry about your situation, but thank goodness it isn't I who has to go through that. It's a short word with very little commitment attached to it. Now, sympathy is a little stronger, a little higher up on that scale. You might even go out and buy a card when you feel sympathy, or you might make a telephone call. You might even say the words, "Oh, too bad, I'm so sorry. This too shall pass." But that's about all that there's to that. Sympathy is fleeting, here one moment, forgotten the next. Now, empathy, that gives you a little more, a little bit higher on the scale. It says, I understand what you're going through. I've been there. Empathy has that walk a mile in another's shoes stamp of approval. But compassion, that's altogether different. Remember what I said about the trio of concepts in our second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations? That the first two had understood strong descriptive verbs connected to them. We fight for justice, we oppose that which doesn't offer equity. And I asked what strong verb is connected to compassion. Well, here's my response to that. The verb, whatever it is, doesn't precede compassion, it follows it. That's why I couldn't find it at first. Compassion demands action. Think of what Miriam taught the tiny God. You are not alone, I am here, I can help. It is up to you to fill in the blank that follows compassion, to fill in the action. Do you remember the first time you realized this, that you understood this definition and acted on it? Well, not even the first time, maybe just a memorable time. For me, it was at the beginning of the semester that I served as chaplain in a hospital as part of my training for seminary, probably because I felt so inadequate. I got there, met my fellow students and our supervisor. I got out my notebook for taking notes on my training and was surprised to hear the supervisor say, "Well, here are your assignments. Go out and act like a chaplain." But she didn't tell us how. She didn't tell us what chaplains did. She didn't tell me what I was supposed to do. She expected us to figure it out for ourselves. She wanted us to learn compassion without ever mentioning the concept. Well, I grumbled in my head as I walked down the unfamiliar halls and into my first assigned room, the room of a patient I didn't know, Bob Anderson, the sign on his door said. Well, Bob Anderson was lying in bed, propped up on pillows, looking unhappy and very sick. It was clear he needed a doctor, not a chaplain. What was I doing there? What was I supposed to do? "Hello, Mr. Anderson," I said cheerfully. "I'm Chaplain Annie. How are you?" And then I knew how vacuous that sounded. Bob opened his eyes and he looked at me, and then he opened his mouth and tried to speak, but his first words caught in his throat and he began to cough. And then he began to choke, and then he began to drool, great gobs of moisture pouring from between his lips as he struggled to get the cough under control. Well, my fight or flight response kicked in, but the flight was from myself. "So you want to be a minister?" myself taunted me. I looked at Bob's eyes, and I knew he wanted to say something to me, but his voice was still stuck behind the wall of his cough. So I sat down, and I took one of his hands. And then I reached over to his bedside table, and I grabbed the tissue, and I wiped the moisture from his lips. "Don't talk until you're ready," I said, and then I was quiet. "I'll stay a while if you want." They weren't the words that Tiny spoke, "You are not alone, I am here," but they meant the same thing. It must have been there in the very air of the hospital. He swallowed a couple of times, and he tested out his lips and tongue, and then he said slowly, "I'm dying, but it's my time, don't worry." Then he said, "My only hope is that I can hang on until my daughter gets here. She's traveling all the way from California." And slowly and painfully and lovingly, he told me about his daughter, what she did, how many children she had, how proud he was of her, and how much he loved her. Periodically, I reached over and got another tissue and wiped his mouth. He fell asleep talking about her, and I left the room wondering what I should have done, wondering how I could have ministered to him if someone had just told me what I was supposed to do. The next morning, a woman appeared in the doorway of the conference room where the chaplains met and asked if any of the women in the group had talked to her father, Bob Anderson, the day before. He said he couldn't remember the chaplain's name. I raised my hand and said it was I, and she said, "He told me how kind you were to him and how you sat with him and listened. I just wanted you to know that he died last night about 2 hours after I arrived. And I wanted to thank you for sitting with him when he was so afraid I wouldn't make it." I got up and I hugged her, and we both cried. I had a definition for compassion. Yes, it demands action, but sometimes the smallest action is the most appropriate and the most appreciated. Being there, being with, a hand and a tissue, a presence. It's a big word. It's a huge concept, compassion, but it's made up of so many small feelings. Author Karen Anderson spoke of compassion in a talk she gave to a gathering some years ago. And she asked, "What is compassion?" And she said, "I think the word has so fallen out of our lexicon that people are confused about it. In English, people often think it means pity and feeling sorry for people. It's sort of ingrained in us. Or people think it's a touchy-feely thing, kumbaya. But in fact, it demands so constantly that we dethrone ourselves from the center of our world, both as an individual, a community, and a political level, and put another person there. Dethrone ourselves from the center of our world. There's the religious paradox. First, you have to learn to be compassionate with yourself, to care for yourself, and then you have to learn to dethrone yourself from the center of your own world. I love that phrase. Learn to dethrone yourself. But first you have to sit upon the throne to know what it feels like. First you have to know darkness to appreciate the light. Even if you know how, you can learn to do it better. It gets easier, both the learning and the dethroning. It becomes more satisfying and more demanding. But before we talk about that, let's share a song about compassion. It's one of my favorites. Wake Now My Senses, number 298, if you have a book at home.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your vow. reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Unearth all beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the white sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now, my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with the people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Wake now, my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care.
This is the time in our service when we share with one another the stories, the communion of names and milestones in our lives. I have quite a few to share with you today. I talked with John Blair this week. He's the president of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Arlington, Texas. He said they have all but closed their doors. They don't have the personnel or the equipment to stream services. Their renters have all withdrawn. So I invited the congregation to worship with us each week, to join us for the coffee hour preceding the service, for the service itself, and for the talk back on Tuesday evenings. I put John on our mailing list and said we would extend that courtesy to anyone in the congregation who would like to stay in touch. If you know anyone from that congregation, reach out and extend a personal invitation to them, and welcome all of you who are joining us this morning. Joe Burnham told me that next Wednesday she is having a pacemaker installed. She says not to worry, it's outpatient surgery. Simply light a candle for her. I suggest you think of her on Wednesday morning. Patrick Gutierrez is also looking at surgery on Monday, having the first of his cataract operations. He says clarity of vision is physical only. And Guy Thornton was sworn in this week as a new American, a new citizen. Guy is in the sanctuary this morning as we're recording. Congratulations. And finally, I would like to mention the passing of Representative John Lewis, a civil rights leader who brought so much to the struggle for equity for the black race this past few years. They were playing some of his past speeches on the radio this morning as I drove to church, and I laughed out loud when he talked about learning to preach by preaching to the chickens in his farm as a child. And he said they listened and nodded their heads, much as the people that he preached to in his church or his companions in the House of Representatives. But he said they were more productive. They at least laid eggs. And then they played his speech when he asked the House of Representatives, where is our courage? Where is our leadership? Where is our moral center? And I cried, and we will miss the work of John Lewis very much. Let us take a moment to consider these stories, the ones that are spoken, the ones that are just living silently in this community. I would like to read a prayer for uncertain times that was written by Cameron Bellman before we start our meditation. He said, "May we who are merely inconvenienced remember those whose lives are at stake. May we who have no risk factors remember those most vulnerable. May we who have the luxury of working from home remember those who must choose between preserving their health and making their rent. May we who have the flexibility to care for our children when their schools close remember those who have no such options. May we who have had to cancel our trips remember those who have no safe place to go. May we who are losing our margin money in the tumult of the economic market remember those who have no margin at all. May we who settle in for a quarantine at home remember those who have no home. As fear grips our country, let us choose love. During this time when we cannot physically wrap our arms around each other, let us find ways to be a loving embrace to our neighbors. So may it be. Let us take a moment in silence. Misha, would you play for us? Thank you, Misha. That was perfect. My reading this morning is called On the Path of Compassion by Steve Garnis Holmes. He says, "Begin with gratitude for all you have received, that you see and that you do not see. And then let your gratitude grow into trust that you are included in great wonder, and entrust yourself to the grace you are given. Then let your trust blossom into compassion for all those who are also part of this oneness, but who have been excluded, used, or targeted. Let your compassion flourish into solidarity, knowing you are the one with those who suffer and that their wholeness is part of your wholeness. Let your solidarity bear fruit in justice, working for freedom and fullness of life for all, against all evil and oppression. And when you are most challenged by the forces of injustice, most weary and discouraged, return to gratitude that you are guided, accompanied, empowered, and saved, and entrust yourself to the undying love of all that is sacred. Words to remember in hard times. I told you that this summer I wanted to talk about different concepts and how they relate to our 7 principles. And this morning I talked about our second principle, to affirm and support justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. But I also said I would offer you 3 challenges this summer, 3 spiritual disciplines to work with throughout our separation from one another. And the first challenge is to help you take good care of yourselves so that you are able to respond to the demands of justice, equity, and compassion. It will help you to become more compassionate with others because it will show you where you fail to make connections. This will not be an unfamiliar spiritual discipline. I have talked to you about this before, but this time I speak more firmly, more explicitly. I want to suggest that you should be practicing it daily, giving yourself a time and a space to do so, giving yourself to yourself and then to the world. And it takes practice. It is hard work to do and takes learning and practice and discipline and offers satisfaction that will come to you with repetition. It is the Buddhist practice of metta, or a loving kindness meditation. Now, I'm going to give you the words I use in my practice with the thought that before you begin, you can create your own words. Think about what you need and want in your life and what you have to give. Think about what you would wish for the world if you were granted 3 wishes, because you are. We always are granted as many wishes as we want to give. Wishing is never forbidden. And then that they may or may not come true is partially in your hands. My wishes are for loving kindness. That's a good place for all of us to start and where most Buddhist practices of metta begin. And then for me follows health, what I refer to as wellness, peace, joy, and love. You may add your own wishes in place of these. You might include the feeling of safety, of happiness, of ease in your life, of wholeness, perhaps acceptance, or whatever comfort speaks to you. But for our practice today, I will share my metta prayer. First, I invite you to get comfortable. In a full practice, you will spend as much as 20 or 30 minutes daily at this discipline. For now, I will try to keep it under 10. So take a deep breath, close your eyes, and feel your body as it relaxes and give into your own self-care. As Buddha taught, as I have been saying this morning, you begin with yourself. You say these words silently to yourself, so say them silently after me. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I have peace and joy. May I know love. So you repeat these words over and over to yourself, thinking about what they really mean, what they would give to your life. Practice them again with me. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I have peace and joy. May I know love. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I have peace and joy. May I know love. And only when you are convinced that you deserve these things when you can feel them in your heart, when you think of your then you can think of your loved ones, your family, your dearest friends. You can extend your practice in individual wishes for each of them, or you may simply picture them all at once as you say these words. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you have peace and joy. May you know love. And as you sit quietly, eyes closed, you picture these people that you love and care for, and you wish for them with all your heart that they might be happy and safe and well and comforted. And you continue to say, may you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you have peace and joy. May you know love. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you have peace and joy. May you know love. And when you have given out your blessings to your loved ones, then you must do the most difficult part of metta. You must consider those who have done you wrong, those who have acted against you, those you have difficulty forgiving, those who are your enemy. And you must picture them, and you must say with feeling, may you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you have peace and joy. May you know love. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you have peace and joy. May you know love. When you have blessed yourself by blessing the world you share, then you may breathe once or twice, open your eyes, and go about your daily routine. But the discipline is to come back tomorrow and do the same. This is your first spiritual challenge for the summer. Sharon Salzberg, a practicing Buddhist and author of the Kindness Handbook, wrote, "Compassion allows us to use our own pain and the pain of others as a vehicle for connection. This is a delicate and profound path. We may be averse to seeing our own suffering because it tends to ignite a blaze of self-blame and regret. And we may be averse to seeing suffering in others because we find it unbearable or distasteful, or we find it threatening to our own happiness. All of these possible reactions to the suffering in the world make us want to turn away from life." And then she continues in her writing, "In contrast, compassion manifests in us as the offering of kindness rather than withdrawal. Because compassion is a state of mind that is itself open, abundant, and inclusive. It allows us to meet pain more directly. With direct seeing, we know that we are not alone in our suffering and that no one need feel alone when they are in pain. Seeing our oneness is the beginning of compassion, and it allows us to reach beyond aversion and separation." Wise words. But to this wisdom, author Andrew Boyd adds this caveat: compassion hurts. When you feel connected to everything, you also feel responsible for everything, and you cannot turn away. Your destiny is bound with the destiny of others. And so we are back to the beginning. We are bound by our principles, if we hold to them, to practice compassion and be open to it. One of our members, Julia Sexton, has a closing line on all of her emails that reads, "Life is so hard. How can we be anything but helpful and kind?" Let us begin our responses from there and continue up on the compassion scale. In the meantime, please join us in singing our closing hymn, 127, "Can I See Another's Woe?" Della, will you lead us?
Can I see another's woe and not be in sorrow too? Can I see another's grief and not seek for kind relief? Can I see a falling tear and not feel my sorrows share? Can a father see his child weep, nor he with sorrow filled? Can a mother sit and hear infant groan and infant fear? No, no, never can it be. Never, never can it be.
Our chalice has burned as a symbol of our being with one another, even as we are apart. I return it to darkness because we take the light into our minds and into our hearts. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. So may it be in all our lives.